used to deal with the vaccine and to pay for the vaccine. So it's incumbent on all of us, government, manufacturers, retailers, and even consumers, to start recognizing that this is a real problem. If you look at the breakdown of illicit trade within the alcohol sector, about 30% of it is counterfeit. Now, counterfeit is the most dangerous of the lot. We have the Liquor Products Act. The Liquor Products Act has very express provisions about how you produce a brandy, how you produce a whiskey, what can go into a wine, what can't go in, more importantly. And our members have to comply with that legislation. And when you have 30% potentially of this illicit trade being refilled with products of dubious quality, there are some health implications. Recently, in December, one of my members' warehouses was targeted in Durban, and they stole bottle caps. Now, why would anyone steal bottle caps? It's very simple. They want to use those bottle caps to refill and sell these products as counterfeit. And duping the consumers into believing that it's an original product. Then the next large segment of illicit trade is what we call in the industry, we call it diversion. So what happens is, for products coming into our country, and in Southern Africa, we have the most sophisticated ports in our region. So most of the consignments come via our ports. They have the paperwork that says this product is on its way to Zambia, it's on its way to Zimbabwe, but those products never leave the country. So you have a situation where, and if you take spirits in particular, the excise incidence rate and targeted incidence rate that has been set by government in its policy is 36% of the average retail selling price. So if you're not paying excise, you have on average a 36% advantage over the legal competitors. And these products never leave our shores, and they get sold in the market. And you've seen now that during the pandemic, these prices have just escalated. So they're not even selling them cheap anymore because it's the law of supplies and demand. If there's no legal supply and only the illegal guys are supplying, they can decide what prices they want to sell these products at. And we have to start tackling those issues. And I agree with many of the views of the panelists that we have existing laws that just needs to be implemented. Now, some solutions have been touted of minimum unit price setting. My challenge is it still requires proper enforcement, because if you said the minimum price for cigarettes needs to be 25 Rand, as Zachariah said, or 150 Rand for brandy, all the legal guys will do that, and so too will the illicit guys. We've also got a system where we look at how low the price is in the market, and we target that as illicit. But as soon as the word got out about the minimum price that Zachariah also referred to, we found that these illicit traders just put it a few cents higher. So what's that doing? It's just improving their margins. So if you have minimum unit prices or minimum prices that must be charged, then you have to enforce it. And that's my problem. We can't even go there until such time as we got our enforcement systems up and running and making sure that we shut these guys down. I'm of the view that even SARS and the police, they spend a disproportionate amount of time focusing on the legal trade. Zachariah mentioned it. We have SARS officials at premises where most of the guys are playing legally. So we've got to start shifting and focusing on these illicit guys. We produce reports on a quarterly basis. It has names of products and where these products have been found in the market, and we share them with the police. And those type of things is what we need to start driving. I'll end there for now. When we get to solutions, I'll make a few proposals on how we think this can best be addressed. Thank you, Karima.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kurt. Some really important questions around enforcement and, of course, also regulation, tighter regulation. But the key issue is enforcement and compliance. And, of course, we know that is where we often fall down. It is with enforcement as a result of a whole host of other issues such as corrupt officials and, of course, just the leaky systems that we have from border control to ports control and to just actual, registering of businesses for lack of a better frame. Without any further ado, let me hand over to our final panelist, by no means the least important, Abram Nelson, who is representing Consumer Goods Crime Risk Initiative. And this is, of course, the big issue here. Issues of counterfeit has been raised, issues of diversion has been raised, and we really need to, I think, also when we do our analysis and our solutions, is break down the categories of illicit goods, because I also think that is where some of the specificity in solutions often get lost, because we think there's a one size fit all. And of course, these issues are very granular, and let's pay some attention to that. So over to you, Abram.
Thank you very much, Karima, and thanks to Business Leadership South Africa for setting up this very important conversation. Just for some background, I should maybe indicate that the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa represents the entire retail chain, which starts at manufacturing all the way through to logistics, right into retail and wholesale. So without throwing around figures and stuff, because I think my colleagues before me have done that, I think the reality of the matter is that the illicit economy is growing. It's growing at a rate that it's starting to compete with your illicit economy. This is leading to unsustainable businesses, legitimate businesses, because of the competition that we're experiencing with the illicit economy. Various industries, from our viewpoint, being the retail sector, are affected, and currently the most prominent ones are your alcohol, your cigarettes, your pharmaceuticals, your apparel, as well as clothing. But I mentioned these keeping in mind that as this economy is growing, we're obviously expecting it to go into other areas of the economy. Unfortunately, it poses risks, health risks. It poses losses to the fiscus, as well as job security, because a lot of people in the industry are losing jobs as a result of unsustainable businesses. In terms of legislation, I think the country has got sufficient legislation to deal with illicit trade, and I speak to all the levels of legislation. We can talk to your Criminal Procedure Act. There's tax laws. We've got your Immigration Act. So in terms of legislation, I think the country is covered. Maybe some of them need to be reviewed, but currently, when I look at the different legislation, I'm sure that we will be able to deal with the threat. The biggest challenge is, and I think everybody has indicated this before, is enforcement. I think there's a major lack of enforcement, but I'm also not throwing that onto the front door of law enforcement. I think enforcement of our laws is dependent on everybody in this country. The reality is our law enforcement agencies do not have the resources to deal with each and every situation, but that's where we as the citizens of the country come in and play an important role. The other issue that I find with our legislation that I think should be reviewed is the punitive measures. I think the punitive measures are not a deterrent, and I can speak to various examples of operations that were conducted where goods were recovered and suspects were arrested and cases were opened. But if you look at the end, the type of punishment that they receive, those syndicates within a month and a half were back on the block, busy trading again, because the punitive measures we have in place are not a deterrent. Then corruption is unavoidable. I think everybody knows that. And here I'm not saying that all our law enforcement agencies or officers are corrupt, but unfortunately you do have groups within law enforcement that are facilitating corruption and are assisting these syndicates. Then lastly, I think there's a lack of collaboration. And when I say lack of collaboration, I'm speaking to the entire chain now. Within law enforcement themselves, there's no collaboration. SARS is running on work, focusing on specific issues. The police are running on stuff, but they never talk to each other. They never get together and sit around the table. Secondly, there's a lack of involvement of business and communities to address this. So I think when we get to the section of recommendations on the way forward, I think collaboration should play a very important aspect. Then just to mention that there are various forms of activities that take place within the illicit trade, and round tripping seems to be the biggest one. But currently, we're also looking at hijackings, because a lot of consignments get hijacked on the roads, and hence me starting off by saying that we cover the entire value chain, because then the logistics companies now also become affected, because stock gets taken during hijackings, and this stock gets sold back into the market to predominantly your informal retailers, and they then sell these goods at a reduced price, which is original products, but because of the crime, that the hijacking crime that was committed, it re-enters the market as an illicit product. And unfortunately, with the economy in the country at this stage, people do tend to go for the cheaper product. And I can say this, if I look at the current hotline that we've launched, initially we were receiving quite a lot of calls, reporting activities. Obviously, this information we relay directly to law enforcement, and we request them to facilitate dealing with the situation. But the minute, for example, a prohibition was brought in for alcohol or for cigarettes, we see an immediate dip in the number of calls that we are receiving. And that is obviously why, because people felt that they would not close their taps on whatever requirements they needed. But that's not the problem. The problem is when the prohibition was lifted, the amount of calls also stayed low, because now people had been given access to a cheaper market for the same type of product. So people also stopped calling or started calling less, because they continued now buying from the market. And that leads me to my next point. I think any crime, commodity related specifically, is led by a demand. If there's a demand for any product, the supply will increase. So what we're seeing currently in the country, and this is my view, is that the demand for these products is high in our country. People want the cheaper product. And because of that, the demand, the supply is growing, because the suppliers obviously realize, but the people prefer this product. It's cheaper, it's saving their money. So that's an aspect that we also need to look at when we look at solutions going forward. I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim, for that incisive input. I think, when we look at the question of enforcement, just by way of kind of introducing the conversation, we've got a very interesting comment off the bat of the round of inputs by the participants, including Busi and myself, and it's from Johan van Lochenberg, and he is saying that every single South African will support the call for credible law enforcement actions, and he'd like us as a panel to look at the effects of state capture on the current criminal justice system, and also SARS, and the fact that we may be expecting a lot from them that they can't do, considering that they've been hollowed out. A lot of these institutions were in fact repurposed for criminal activity to line the pockets of private individuals linked to very powerful people in our government. So he's talking about, should we not look at stopgap measures, considering how weak these systems are, particularly in criminal justice systems, and also just look at the role of people and entities associated with the tobacco industry and the demise of SARS since 2014. The State Capture Project very quickly jumped onto their bandwagon, and he'd like us to comment on that. And I think it's a good place to start, panelists. Maybe I'll start with you, Busi. When we look at small enforcement issues. Just a simple thing of the curfew, for example. My sister lives in a coloured township in Mitchell's Plain, and she always says to me, Karima, you speak so much about people having to wear masks and the curfew. I've got, kids playing on my field every evening, way beyond curfew. There's no police here because this is a poor community. There's no vested interest for them to be here. Between her house and getting to the main road, you have to pass at least 7 drug merchants and alcohol merchants to be able to get to the main road. And these places are not being raided. And if they are raided, the police are often there on behalf of a rival gang and confiscating goods to empower, somebody else because they are in the pockets of these people. So the system has been weakened by state capture, but historically criminals often target systems. And we come out of an apartheid era system where the systems were corrupted for all manner of things. It's not an accident that a lot of the people, who are operatives at places like Vlakplaas were also operatives in, your red light zones in places like Hillbrow with nightclubs and a whole range of, activity where you kind of walk that dodgy line between what is legal and illegal. So let's focus on our existing criminal justice system. Busi, I'd like, as the only female on the panelist, I'm going to be biased toward you. I'd like to throw the ball in your court to kick off with. I mean, are we expecting too much from our services considering how they've been knocked down? And if we are to look at stopgap measures, what ought those to be?
Thank you very much, Karima, and thanks to Johan for that question. So I think let's agree that the biggest weakness that we have as a country, and the reason why things are not moving at the rate at which they are supposed to be moving, the reason why implementation is dismally failing in this country, is because we have a state that is not capable. So South Africa at the moment doesn't have a capable state. So we don't have the right leadership, and the fact that we don't have decisive leadership just exacerbates the problem. So one of the most successful projects ever implemented in our democracy, Karima, has been the state capture project, because it sought to weaken and hollow out the SOEs, which it achieved. It sought to weaken the criminal justice system, which it achieved, and it obviously sought to weaken SARS, which it actually also achieved. So Abraham referred to the fact that the illicit economy in this country is growing at almost a similar rate to the licit economy. Zakaria made mention of the fact that, the growth of the illicit market as a result of the ban has actually been very high. He spoke about 25% before lockdown, 100% during lockdown, and 35% after the lockdown. And the reason why that is obviously because, SARS at the moment is dealing with trying to recapacitate their illicit trade unit. So we were not sitting at the rate that the illicit trade was not sitting at the rate that it's currently sitting now, precisely because 10 years ago, you had a very capable SARS that actually, focused on the illicit trade market and actually did a brilliant job. So its weakening meant that the illicit trade was given impetus. And now we are sitting with the problem that we're sitting in, and we're therefore looking at all the risks, and the disadvantages of the illegal imports and the illegal trade that is actually going on. So BLSA has currently deliberately sought to work with SARS. We have a relationship with them where we are trying to see how we can actually assist towards the recapacitation of SARS, where we are actually trying to see how we can actually bolster the efforts of Edward Kisweta and his team in terms of ensuring that SARS can be restored to its former glory. So it is unfortunately a problem that is going to take much longer than what it took to actually achieve, the demise of these institutions. So we're going to have to brace ourselves that what we are dealing with as a country is trying to turn the Titanic. And it's not going to be something that is actually going to be achieved in probably the next 5 to 10 years. Let's agree that the caliber of some of the leadership and management within these institutions is not at the right level. So we have actually been rid of the right people who actually had the knowledge and expertise. I mean, just if you were to just move from the issue of the illicit trade and look at our broader SOEs, look at ESCOM, look at Transnet, look at SAA, look at the fact that South Africa at the moment is not even in a position to provide energy security, and yet you've got an institution, which is ESCOM, that has been around for more than 100 years, and we've been brilliant. We've had countries come to learn from ESCOM how to actually, get the energy generation right. And because of the state capture project, you're sitting with a very weak ESCOM that is actually sitting as an albatross around our necks. So it's a very critical issue, and unfortunately, we cannot expect that this is something that we can get right in the next few months or in the next few years. It's going to take a lot of work from all of us. And I think all of us as South Africans should be asking the question of how do we actually play a meaningful role in terms of trying to assist and in terms of working towards the recapacitation of these institutions and assisting whatever government efforts that are there, to try and turn this Titanic around. Thank you, Karima.
Okay, is there anyone from the panelists that want to add on to what Johan had pushed, toward the panelists, and in addition to what Busi is saying? I see Eunice's hand is up and Zachariah, so I'm going to go in that order. Eunice, Zachariah, Kurt, and I'll close with our.
Thank you, Karima. Can I just comment on your question and also on what Busi said? Let's confront the brutal facts. When Tom Moyane became the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service, we went into a mess and then finally into a total mess. He was the person, for whatever reason that we ought to know about, was a person that really scaled down the fight against the illicit trade. Now, we know there are allegations that he was allegedly connected to certain politicians. We know allegations that certain politicians are connected to the tobacco trade. That is a separate discussion. People like Johan van Lochenberg need to be praised for taking the initiative, and whether there was a so-called rogue unit or not is not the debate and the discussion right here. We know the findings of that particular investigation. Let us look at where we are today. SARS needs to really act with speed, and they need to get this unit back on the road to make sure that they fight the illicit trade, not only in cigarettes, in alcohol, in counterfeit goods, in tax evasion. We spoke earlier, and I think, Kurt, you raised it as well, about the so-called round-tripping, where people are claiming tax, the goods don't leave South Africa. We know the tricks that these people use. Let's also be very clear. The illicit trade is crime and it's criminality. Very often in some countries we are told that the proceeds, some of it from the illicit trade, goes towards funding terror, goes towards funding crime, organized crime syndicates. We know that money laundering is rife. We've heard a lot of allegations of people involved in this trade being involved in money laundering. Why are they still free? Why are they living the life? Why are they buying properties in other countries? Why are they taking the money from the illegal gains and investing it so-called legally in other industries? We are not fools. SARS needs to act. Karima, you asked about the criminal justice system. Again, let's confront the brutal facts. South Africa's criminal justice system, in our view, works far too slowly. Whether you are a victim of crime, whether you are a victim of fraud, whether you are a victim of whatever other wrongdoing, the wheels of justice turns far too slowly. In 2010, the World Cup came, we had special courts, the people were processed. I was a victim of a house invasion 6 years ago. Believe it or not, the two suspects are still on trial in the Pretoria Regional Court 6 years plus later. So the wheels of justice is a problem. Do they have the capacity? Yes, I think they do have the capacity, but they really need to get their act together. AB mentioned about the consumer goods line hotline. As the Vice President of Crime Stoppers International, we pride ourselves on anonymous tip-offs. I often say, someone, somewhere, somehow knows something about crime. Why do we protect these criminals? Somebody in your family, your neighborhood, your workplace might be a hijacker. Somebody might be involved in drugs. Somebody might be involved in all forms of wrongdoing. What we need to do is to start blowing the whistle on these people. Provide detailed information, who, what, when, where, why, how. Now, I know Consumer Goods Council has a capacity. We're getting a lot of tip-offs, but the most important part of tip-offs is when the information goes to the law enforcement agencies, they need to act. We need to see action. Now, Karima, you mentioned about drug dealing in I think, the Western Cape. You know, I'm inundated as an anti-crime activist every day with people saying, so-and-so is selling drugs in my street. But do me a favor, do not send the local police. The local police are corrupt. Take a cop from outside or get General Mawela or get the Minister of Police to spend a special unit here to stop these drugs. Why? Because they don't trust the local police. Again, the mistrust that we have in our criminal justice system or our law enforcement is a problem. You see these people, again, selling the illicit cigarettes, the alcohol, the whatever the counterfeit goods, whatever the problem is, openly. Why is government not acting? We need to restore the trust.
Our time is just tight. I just want to give some of the other panelists an opportunity to make their input, and then I'll come back. Let me hand over to Zachariah. Zachariah, thank you. Thank you, Yusuf.
Thank you, Karima. I think maybe let me just take you back during the lockdown, the banning of cigarette. We saw, just to add on what Busi was just saying, we saw the officials that are working in our government smoking cigarette. And by then, I think it was during the funeral of one senior official of the ANC. And there we saw people, senior officials, smoking cigarettes. Then you ask yourself, where did they buy these cigarettes? Because by then the cigarette was banned. So then it shows to you that our government, most of the people that are working in our government, they are very much corrupt, and they must, for us to deal with illicit trading, we must start with people that are working in our government, because we believe that most of them, they are corrupt. And then just to add on what Yusuf was saying also, that our criminal system, it seems to be very slow. It is not responding to issues that need to be responded on time, because those are the issues, because we believe that those officials should be, by then, they could have just asked them, investigate, do the investigation, so that we should know, are they part of these illicit traders or not? So that could have helped us in one way or the other. So we have seen also with the banning of alcohol 3 weeks ago. We saw some people using the buggy of the estate carrying alcohol. Then you ask yourself, because by then alcohol was banned. So where do they get this alcohol? So most of our people that are working in our government, they are very much corrupt. We need to deal away with them, and then that would be the start for us to eliminate this illicit trading. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zachariah. Can I just ask the other panelists, if the points about corruption has been made, don't repeat it. Can we get to, focusing our minds and just having a conversation that drives us towards solutions? Kurt, you up next. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Karima. I think and Johan raises a very important question. What do we do with these state organs that have been stripped of their resources, and how? And I think Busi and Business Leadership South Africa is doing some great work trying to help government to recapacitate itself. And we all should get involved in that. I think we spoke earlier about a multi-sectoral approach. From an industry perspective, we certainly, we've got guys on the ground. We have the ability to support the police with the things that we see that can be reported to the police. SARS has started a good program. I think it needs to be bolstered. They call it the preferred trader program. So, if you're shown to be generally compliant in your tax matters, we spend less time with you. We focus on the people who are not tax compliant, because we've got to find ways, practical ways of helping to stretch the limited resources. I was having a conversation once with somebody, and they're talking about, from a policing perspective, simple things like changing police partners regularly. I mean, because when I when I meet a new officer as a policeman, I don't know whether he's corrupt, and I first have to get to know him before I can do things in front of him. And those are the type of things, practical things the police should be doing. Swap the guys around regularly, so that the Mitchell's Plain example you used. If you bring a guy in from Constantia, they don't know if he's corrupt, and until I know, and by the time I get to that point where I know him well enough to decide I can do these illegal things in front of him, he's moved off and gone somewhere else, and I have another partner. So those are really practical, short-term solutions until we bolster these organs of state that have lost all their capacity.
Thank you so much, Kurt. Please, panelists, remember some of these innovative ideas and solutions, because some of it is really low-hanging fruit that can be implemented. Over to you, Abram.
Thank you, Karima. Maybe from my side, just to agree with Johan, I think the criminal justice system at this stage is overburdened and disorganized, and that is obviously as a result of those state capture years where the focus was more on politics than on crime. I think going forward, and I don't want to say too much about it, is that we should start off by refocusing all our law enforcement agencies. They should look at themselves and determine the priorities. Secondly, they should also look at re-establishing specialized units. And as Kurt says, it's a short-term strategy. Establish specialized multidisciplinary units and focus on the threat ahead. And today's topic is a major threat to the economy of the country. Thank you.
Before we've got quite a few questions, but just in terms of the police, as someone who's looked at corruption and state capture in the criminal justice system, it's quite worrying for me as a journalist to see no outcry from the business community on the attempt by the Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, as well as the head of IPID, to actually denude the work of the independent directorate. If we look at the moment, I had a show on The Fix where I basically illustrated that the head of IPID, the new head of IPID, who was handpicked by the police minister, by the way, and the portfolio committee, is in fact, continuing the INSIT, which is the specialized investigative unit, and that is the unit that managed to put 10 police generals on trial as we speak for crimes that they've committed, from corruption, from blue light corruption. I mean, does it bother no one that not a single police commissioner in this country has served out his or her term? Should Business Leadership South Africa not take a direct interest in the fact that we are not seemingly able to have a police commissioner that can be without allegations of corruption? And the one unit that has looked at corruption is the unit that is being dismantled by the police minister in the administration of Cyril Ramaphosa, the supposed New Dawn. So from my side, as a facilitator and as a journalist that has focused on this, please ask yourself why this unit is being disconnected and discontinued, because they have so far put the most success on the table. They have put 10 generals, past and present, from a national deputy commissioner to a former acting commissioner, Khamotso Pahlani, General Ngwenya. There's a whole range of them, former KwaZulu-Natal police commissioner of the province, all on trial. And yet when these people are brought to trial, there's no comment from the business community. There's no comment from the different sectors. And these are massive achievements that this specialized unit that is under-resourced, underfunded, understaffed, that they are pulling off. And here we have an audacious move by the police minister to actually try and pull the teeth of this independent unit, who's working, by the way, with the investigative directorate headed up by Advocate Hermione Cronje. And this is some of the success that they have. These cases must still be prosecuted, but at least they are in court. So it is also important, as hollowed out as these institutions are, they are actually wins. And we're not doing enough, I think, as the business community and as people in different sectors to, in fact, fight for the independence of these units. In fact, I think the Helen Suzman Foundation is the only NGO that is in the Supreme Court of Appeal now to try and insist that IPID must be a unit that must be retained and that its independence must be free from the parliamentary committee and also from the police minister, who is, of course, a political appointment. Sorry, I had to bring that to bear on the conversation. Last year, I spent something like 2 months focusing on the criminal justice system. Many of you might have seen the police minister, the police commissioner on my show, being unable to answer questions from why they are contracting corrupt, people for PPE to why some of these generals are getting a slap on the wrist for stealing, actually. And I think we really need to focus ourselves and our minds. Let me get to the next question. I've got a question here from Anonymous. Firstly, thank you to the Business Leadership South Africa for setting up this conversation. Kurt made a very important statement. Government must protect the legal traders. The alternative is that we will end up with only illicit traders with no income for government services. An inordinate amount of effort is spent on catching the syndicate soldiers and legal traders trying to survive. But those behind the syndicates are getting away all the time. Why are we not following the money? There seems to be a lack of willingness to call out the elephant in the room. Who is behind the syndicates and who is benefiting from these illicit trades? Now, here is the boil being launched once and for all, people. Let's talk about the big kingpins behind the smuggling, the corrupt government officials, the ministers, the police generals that all know about what is going on. Let's talk about going for people who actually have real power and not the chap selling loose cigarettes on the corner and having parading those people in front of the television cameras, putting them through an already constrained criminal justice system when the person actually pulling the strings behind the scenes is sitting comfortably in a leafy suburb or sometimes even out of the country, going about their business. Let me throw it open to you, Kurt. Alcohol is big, but also let's not forget our past. A lot of people were kept out of the alcohol trade, particularly black people. The only way they could come in was to do so illegally. And that culture of illegality is still very much in our communities. And that is why people have this dubious relationship with the law. Black life was criminalized. So there's a part of us that is severely comfortable with illegality because we had to do it for our survival. How do we change that? I mean, it's obviously a question of leadership. It's obviously a question of reaching out. But surely big alcohol can't also just lock out small-time operators, black operators, women operators, young people that need to come in. I mean, that's why the illicit trade in things like alcohol is often so attractive for them, Kurt.
Absolutely. Karima, yes. I think that we need to start reimagining this system. We have a situation in South Africa where the unlicensed businesses far outnumber the licensed businesses. And you're right. I mean, we've tried for many years. The police try and shut them down. One gets shut down, three gets opened. And we have to start thinking about this thing very differently. And I think the way to approach it is to start getting those unregulated businesses into the regulated system. And, it's a false narrative that many of the unlicensed shebenas don't want to be licensed. I think many of them do want to be licensed. And we have to look at creative ways of how do we bring them into the network so that we can start saying, guys, if you want to operate within this legal system, these are the ground rules that you need to play by. And it stretches across a number of issues, from the issues that are in the newspaper on a day-to-day basis, like illicit trade that we're talking about, but also it can go as far as dealing with the issues of underage drinking and binge drinking, and how do we get all of these businesses that are out there operating within a legal framework and making their rightful contribution to the tax and the fiscus that we actually want to support. So, and you're right, big business has a clear role to play there in starting to work with government, trying to help get more of the unregulated into the regulated fold, and then hold them accountable for how we trade. Because it's a short distance from operating without a license to selling products which are actually illegal. And if you can start by bringing them into the regulated fold and start expecting them to operate legally and paying their taxes. So what we've been trying to do as industry, we're trying to, with the customers that we can work with, and remember, legally, we cannot trade with a business that is not licensed. So those who are operating legally, we're trying to incentivize them to do the right thing, to comply with their licensing conditions. And it's simple things. Through Aware, we've been working with just helping them with signage. And on the signage, you put the trading times on that signage. So then somebody from the community comes and says, hey, look, you're supposed to close at 9 o'clock and it's 10 o'clock now and you're still open. And even some of the traders are saying, look, this actually helps me, because now when I have patrons in my store, I say, guys, look at the sign. It says I need to close now. And it's not me kicking you out. It's the law kicking you out. And he says, it's actually made my life a lot easier, blaming the sign. And it's little things like that we can start turning the tide.
Absolutely. Busi, I see you nodding your head there, quite a bit. On the liquor issue also, I'm not sure to what extent you guys are monitoring violence in communities, particularly communities that are increasingly feeling the power of illegal syndicates and criminal syndicates. So the two types of police officers that are being targeted by crime syndicates are the police officers who issue out liquor licenses and liquor permits. If you look at a place like Khayelitsha, if you look at a place like Mitchell's Plain, and a whole range of other townships, those are the police officers that are often shot and killed, because if they don't act in a corrupt fashion, if they don't yield to the syndicates, then they are taken out and corrupt officials are actually, put in their place. So again, we can have low-hanging fruit. Are these perhaps individuals and units in the police that must get special protection, that must be handled in a particular way? And what are the incentives here? Because these people are being specifically targeted by the criminal syndicates, and often they are the victims of crime. Let me go on to a question from Peter. He says, alcohol bottles and cigarette boxes can be marked with microdots and other trace identifiers. Why has this yet not been done? Maybe we can hear from Busi, just from Business Leadership South Africa from a macro point, and then perhaps the industry representatives there on the panel on Peter's questions. I just want to get through some of the questions as well, and then we can come through to some of the thematic issues, so that those who've taken the time to listen to the webinar also feel that their concerns are being addressed. Let's start with you, Busi.
Thank you very much, much, Karima. So our Business Against Crime unit has actually been very big on the micro-dotting of vehicles, right? So Peter is absolutely right. If it can be done for vehicles, it can definitely be done for cigarettes and for alcohol as well. But you see, Yusuf earlier on referred to the links that some of these illicit traders have with some top officials in government in this country. So I don't think that we can actually be naive to that fact. When you're talking about what can the business community do to try and assist, the capacitation of government and to try and assist with some of these things, I don't think that we can forget that there's still a lot of remnants, Karima, of the state culture in these institutions. So we can't therefore sit here and pretend as if we are not aware that a lot of these government units are not interested, with any assistance from either business or any, institution or stakeholder that actually has an interest in terms of working with government to try and assist government. You can only offer assistance if assistance is required. So government in this country normally pays a lot of lip service in terms of working together with all the social partners. But when it comes to bringing in the social partners in an earnest way, to ensure that we solve for some of these issues that we have in this country, then it's a totally different problem. So I think unless and until we can have a government that is not at war with itself, unless and until you can have a government that is serious about driving this country in a particular direction, in one direction, because then, there are a lot of interest and there are a lot of factions. So you might find that we have a president who is serious about rooting out corruption, but it doesn't go to say that all the ministers and all the government units are actually singing from that same hymn sheet, because the reality of the matter on the ground is that that is not the case. So unfortunately, Peter, the reason why some of these things are not happening, it's because, we are going to be lethargic about coming up with some of these innovations, because therefore it's going to hurt some of the top officials who are actually benefiting from this crime and corruption that is happening. Thanks, Karim.
Okay, Kurt. Oh, sorry. Let me bring Yusuf in quickly because he hasn't been part of the conversation for a while. My apologies, Yusuf.
I'll be very brief, Karima. I know we're running out of time. Firstly, to talk about the appointment of the National Police Commissioner, for me the answer is simple. Go to Chapter 12 of the National Development Plan. Trevor Manuel, when he was still minister, was part of it, where they outlined how a National Police Commissioner should be appointed. Simply put the National Development Plan into action. Question number 2, somebody asked, are there not inspectors at the cigarette factories? As far as I know, there are inspectors, but the fact is that billions of rands still get lost. Are the inspectors effective is a different argument. And are they corruptible? I don't know. That's something that needs to be investigated. But surely their presence there is not helping. And I know Zakaria and his industry have been very adamant they need to beef up the inspectors. Another problem that we have is possibly warehouses where all the illicit goods are being stored. Those are not being tracked down. There might be illegal manufacturing plants for alcohol, for cigarettes. That needs to be stopped. And again, somebody asked, what about the big fish? The so-called kingpins. Let's not target the trader at the bottom. Let's not target the guy at the street corner selling a packet of 20 cigarettes. We need to get to the big fish. And somebody put it very eloquently, we need to follow the money. These people are making billions, they're getting away with it, and we need to bring them to book. Let me say for the record, Karima and colleagues, you all know, this is a very toxic industry. When you affect the pockets of criminals, they're going to come after you. Already we've seen, I've received many death threats over the past few years. I don't want to talk about my own personal situation, but the intimidation continues. The dirty tricks continue. The other day, the South African Tobacco Organization, which is a so-called Front for Go Leaf Tobacco, only one member, issued a media statement and they said that Yusuf Abramji is in the pockets of big tobacco. In the 1990s, he drove a black Nissan branded by a certain big tobacco company, which is the biggest rubbish I've ever heard. I've never even driven a Nissan in my life. Having said that, let me also say that I just received a WhatsApp message from a very senior executive at the South African Revenue Service. I don't have his permission as yet to mention his name, but he says, and I will quote, "I'm watching with interest. Our challenges are bound to grow with the Free Trade Act kicking in. The key word is partnership and integration nationally, regionally, and globally. Government alone cannot win this fight. I think the senior executive, who, by the way, from Customs and Excise, I agree with you wholeheartedly. We need to join hands. We need to strengthen partnership. We need to work together. Let's fix up all the mistakes. Let's fight the scourge. Let's stop the illicit trade. Let's stop the criminals.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. Let me hand over to Kurt. Kurt, if you could pick up on some of the issues that Yusuf had mentioned, particularly the question of partnerships.
Yeah, look, I'll get to partnerships in a moment, but there's a very critical question about technology that's available to be able to track illicit products. Now, I would, if anybody could bring me a foolproof mechanism, we'll wholeheartedly endorse it. The problem is there's jurisdictions such as Mozambique where they have tax stamps, but you have to get the tax stamp from government. The illicit operators get their tax stamps first. So if that thing can be reproduced, then it's a waste of time. And then you have to equip SARS officials. I mean, if you've got something that's got a microchip in, a SARS official has got to have the equipment to just go and scan that and say this packet doesn't have it. And we'll add all of these things. It adds to the cost for the legal businesses, and the illegal guys still continue. And so any idea that suggests, I've always said, and I've been approached by a number of businesses who say they have got a foolproof suggestion. And I say, if you can prove to me that, if governments could pay for that, if I'm going to get my money back in excise, then government can pay for the stamp. But most governments aren't prepared to pay for that stamp because they aren't foolproof, and that's a big challenge. If there's foolproof mechanisms out there, I'd certainly like to engage with people, and we can go to government together. I think when we talk partnerships, Yusuf is 100% correct. We've got to sort this out with partnerships. We have got to work with the police, with SARS, and we've got to get the community involved. And we also find that, I'm glad that AB is on this call, Abraham Nelson's on this call, because even some of the retailers don't even know the product that they have on their shelves is illicit. So we've got to train people, the community, to recognize what is illicit product. We've got to train retail, and that's a role that manufacturers should be leading the charge on, and working with police. The difficulty with working with the police is they still need to apply their intelligence. I mean, we go to them, we say, here's the information. The problem is it's a competitive world, and they need to do their own independent investigations, and they can't just accept. So there's just so far we can go in helping them. But through organizations such as the Consumer Goods Council, where we are bringing the consumers into this, and consumers need to understand that this is not a soft crime. It does hurt, and it hurts even the marginalized people in our country, because money doesn't go to service delivery because it's lost to the fiscus. And we can't complain about service delivery and go on service delivery protests when we are also part of the problem and buying these illicit products. So you've got to start engaging with all stakeholders, working together to help them understand this is not a problem that we can look the other way.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the key question here is partnerships, but also obviously how you educate and get people to adopt a different value system. Every from a consumer point of view, is there enough education? I mean, we heard now that even retailers themselves are not knowledgeable about whether they're selling legal or illegal goods. And I suppose the consumer even more so.
I agree with Kurt completely. I think there's a definite lack of awareness amongst retailers, but as well as amongst consumers. And as part of our desk at Consumer Goods Council for the 2021 year, we're planning on an awareness campaign, and we want to take it all the way from the top all the way down to the bottom. Your SMMEs, your informal businesses, they all need to be made aware of the impact that illicit trade has on the economy, and then also in the long run how it will affect their lives. Just to go back to the track and trace, I might not have mentioned, but the Consumer Goods Council is the official GS1 barcode providers in South Africa. So at the time when SARS announced a tender for track and tracing of products, we put our hands up because the GS1 system has been successfully used in the European Union to assist manufacturers and retailers to track and trace their products. So yes, track and tracing is another important aspect that we must not miss out. Then just in conclusion, I think I agree with everybody, and as I indicated in my initial opening message, collaboration. We need to all work together. We need to get law enforcement, we need to get business, we need to get communities together. Secondly, we need to facilitate reporting. We need to get people to report freely and feel that they're doing a duty to their country by reporting these types of activities. Then enforcement, as we indicated earlier, we need to support our law enforcement agencies to ensure that they are in a position to address the threat. And yes, we need to look at the bigger players. We can start doing disruptive operations on the guy on the street, but at the end of the day, the end goal should be to identify the elephant in the room and dealing with them. I spoke to awareness and then training. What we've seen over the years is that a lot of law enforcement officers are willing to do the job, but they lack the knowledge in terms of product identification, number one, and number two, the relevant legislation that they should use when doing these operations. So I think this is another big operation we should push in terms of training law enforcement officers, and in so doing, we will empower them to successfully perform their duties. And then lastly, I think pooling resources. We all got, from all the different industries, we've got various resources, and I think we should pool those resources. And yeah, I'm talking to analysis of information, sharing of information, assisting where funding is required to ensure that we get this message out there to everybody that the illicit trade, the illicit economy is busy destroying the illicit economy of this country, and in the long run, the citizens of this country are going to suffer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abraham, for basically pulling it all together in many ways. We had one more question that I'm just going to quickly throw in from Jan Cronier. He says a number of speakers mentioned placing permanent SARS officials with cigarette factories to monitor goods. Could you say to what extent this already occurs, and how would you stop these officials from becoming corrupt? And then the second question he had was, wouldn't one way be to beat the illicit market would be to lobby to cut out state taxes, enabling producers and sellers to drop the prices of cigarettes and alcohol so low that it doesn't make financial sense for the illicit market to operate? Now, I know the last question can span an entire conversation, so let's park the last question. Just the first one I think is really interesting. It's just the question of placing permanent people, at these places, and most importantly, how do you prevent them and ring fence them from becoming corrupt? Let me give that question to Zachariah, as he is from the tobacco industry, and then that will be the last contribution, because we're fast running out of time, so that I can do my close. Over to you, Zachariah.
Thanks very much, Karima. I think from the tobacco industry, we would definitely welcome that. That is one of the things that we have been asking, that to all the manufacturers, there must be SARS officials. But the only problem that we are having is that are they not going to be corrupt? Because it seems as if now each and every person from the government is getting corrupted or is corrupt by himself. So that's the biggest problem that we are having. But we definitely support the notion of having SARS officials to each and every company. And second to that, just want to highlight on the issue of the partnership, that would also welcome the issue of getting our government working with them, getting all the people, manufacturers together, because we have so many cigarette manufacturers in this country, but most of them, they are illegal, and then these are the people that are doing this illicit trading. So if the government can organize that and have us all in one house and try to discuss these issues, I think by then we'll come up with a solution, and then that will also help the government in a way of eliminating this illicit trading. So we welcome the notion that we must definitely have the SARS officials on each and every manufacturer.
You are on mute, Karima.
My apologies. Sorry, we have come to the end of this session. We're slightly over time by about 2 or 3 minutes, but I think we've been largely good. We've done our participants justice, as well as those who have taken the time to answer questions. As you can see, the question of illicit crime highlights a couple of important issues. The one is that it is everybody's problem. It is not the problem of the government. It is not the problem of big business. It's not the problem of the small trader trying to survive. It affects all of us. And if you think that illicit trade is a victimless crime, think again. If you're looking and listening to the numbers here, that bag that you're buying, that Hong Kong bag, don't think that you are better than the person buying illicit drugs. It's one and the same thing. There's no relativeness when it comes to morality here. We are putting people out of jobs. If you are buying illicit cigarettes, your activities are tied to people who are selling human beings as if they are chattel. It is part of the same value chain, and it's really important that as a society we begin to understand this. Big business, you also cannot operate as monopolies. You can't take the bread out of the mouth of those who are trying to feed themselves. The red tape cannot be so onerous that nobody can ever get a license, or that you have to corrupt a liquor license official to be able to get a license. The one group that we need to get onto these platforms, Busi, and this is a challenge for the business community, are the banks. The financial institutions have a lot of responsibility to carry here. They hide the money of criminals. They make it hard for small business to access finance. They make it hard for women who have no collateral to take out loans. They make it difficult for us who have records at the credit bureau to be able to stand on our feet. And yet the financialization of our economy is such that they are the top feeders in this economy. So as long as the banks are not part of this conversation, the question of bringing the real players in the economy on board to work with everybody to push back illicit crime, cannot be dealt with. And perhaps the next round of conversations must be about the way in which financial institutions help us in stopping illicit crime, and more importantly, including people who have historically been locked out of our economy, because for as long as there is a demand for these goods, people will supply them, and people will get rich off acting in the shadows and in the margins. And the last thing, of course, is that there is no illicit economy if there isn't a bridge to the formal economy. And that bridge is corrupt civil servants, corrupt business people, corrupt politicians. You make it possible for these people to survive. So we've obviously got our work cut out for us, multi-sectoral, multi-pronged approaches, inclusive rather than excluded, and of course, a lot of education. Business Leadership South Africa, thank you for putting this issue on the agenda. It is a matter that concerns us all, and let's take some of the practical things that came from here, some of the low-hanging fruit that can be implemented back to your individual sectors. And of course, we hope that at the next webinar of this nature, we'll be able to, put our finger on the pulse of some of the solutions that we need to be driving, because we all know what the problems are. And it's pointless for us to constantly say government is useless, because government too can diagnose a problem excellently. It's when we have to implement that we all fall down. So let it be a cautionary tale for everybody. Thank you, participants, and thank you for our online audience. And most importantly, thank you, Business Leadership South Africa, for providing leadership on this critical issue. My thanks to you. This webinar is now officially over. Bye-bye. I'm not sure how to get out.
A very good afternoon, and we come out of that Business Leadership South Africa webinar on illicit trade and what it does to the economy. It's time for a short break here on Point. When we come back, we'll bring you updates on the